Hi, my name is Ganga Devi, and today I will be speaking about the future of cyber terrorism. We witnessed humanity's most disastrous terrorist attack take place in the United States in the morning of Tuesday, September 11, 2001. What we now refer to as the 9/11, the attack resulted in 2,977 fatalities, 25,000 injuries, and at least a $10 billion property damage and infrastructure. This cataclysmic warfare set the tone of the 21st century. But we are witnessing yet another kind of warfare, something we may not be able to avoid in the dynamic future: cyber terrorism. Before I get into the problems that this issue poses, let's go over to the difference between cyber terrorism and cyber warfare in general. Cyber terrorism and cyber warfare are closely related. The most common definition of cyber terrorism is the use of the internet to conduct violent acts that result in or threaten loss of life or significant bodily harm in order to achieve political or ideological gains through threat or intimidation. Any kind of terrorism that takes place with the use of the internet to achieve said goals by means of tools such as computer viruses, worms, and phishing, etc., are included in cyber terrorism. Cyber warfare, on the other hand, is the use of digital attacks to attack a nation, causing comparable harm to actual warfare and/or disrupting the vital computer systems. The difference is, while cyber terrorism can cause harm to anyone in the vicinity, cyber warfare has specific targets, while the commonality among them is that both are different forms of terrorism. Cyber terrorism became a reality after a wave of high profile terrorist attacks that took place in the United States of America, which is the World Trade Center bombing of 1993 and the Oklahoma bombing in 1995. The following year, the threat of cyber terrorism was added to the policy map in Washington after the Marsh Commission report was published. Since then, the rising threat of cyber terrorism was documented constantly, but the unprecedented growth of the internet makes it incredibly hard to control the kind of threat that cyber terrorism poses. The internet has changed the face of terrorism. Different governments had different approaches while tackling cyber terrorism. While Japan started combating cyber terrorism in the year 2000 after a series of attacks caused by Chinese nationalistic activists and Japanese left wing extremists, Tokyo executed a special action plan to tackle cyber terrorism. In the US, the 9/11 resulted in a series of legislative measures to tackle cyber induced attacks. Austria introduced the 2013 Cyber Security Strategy, and South Korea's 2012 Defense White Paper calls out various forms of cyber terrorism: hacking, DDoS attacks, denials of service, logic bombs, Trojan horses, worm viruses, guns, etc. While our history with terror attacks resulted in casualties in large number, cyber terrorism poses a different kind of problem. One smart man can create huge havoc in the digital society we live in. Considered as one of the most notorious cyber attacks in history is the Mafia Boy case, where a 15-year-old high school student in Canada who unleashed a DDoS attack on high-profile commercial websites like the Amazon, CNN, Yahoo, and eBay, which resulted in an estimated $1.2 billion damage in 2000. But one would expect for the rules to tighten after an attack like that. But even today, millions of people are being scammed daily and getting their personal data compromised. Today, a security breach that affects a few million people is old news. Now, a single breach in an app could compromise billions of people's personal data. The Sina Weibo, WannaCry, NotPetya, etc. compromised around 530 million users' personal data and cost around $193 billion in lost revenue. It changed the dynamic of the threat society is facing today. In 2012, John Allen Brickley defined cyber terrorism as the use of cyber capabilities to conduct, enabling, disruptive, and destructive militant operations in cyberspace to create and exploit fear through violence or the threat of violence in the pursuit of political change. In his book Cyber Terrorism Case Studies, published in 2014, Daniel Cohn cited case studies that were either hacktivism, cybercrime, or nation state operations. The question here is how dangerous the nation state operations are to society, given how common nation state enabled cyber attacks are. Is there a difference between cyber terrorism and offensive military cyber operations? Let's explore one of the most famous nation state operation used as a means of defense. Stuxnet, a dangerous computer worm that completely demolished and caused substantial damage to the nuclear program of Iran, was first discovered in 2010. It was reportedly created jointly by USA and Israel, although neither of the countries took responsibility for it. The computer worm, introduced to nuclear power stations through a USB, altered key systems which led to the failure of critical components. 1 year later, cybercriminals reverse engineered this worm, which targeted various European organizations, including the US. One wrong move could bring catastrophic damage and technological fallout. But what would happen if these technologies reach the hands of terrorists like the ISIS? We have been seeing a lot more cyber attacks in the past 5 years than in the last 10 years. The North Korean hack on the Sony pictures and the Russian attack on the US election are some of the most well known nation state attacks, which is far more dangerous than any other online attacks. One of the most dangerous recently recognized threat is a cyber jihad. Cyber jihad is the use of modern technological tools and cyberspace in order to promote jihad against those classified by its followers as enemies of Islam. This is majorly operated by the hacktivist of the Cyber Caliphate, also known as the Islamic State Hacking Division or the United Cyber Caliphate. More than terrorist attacks, the ISIS is far more active in recruiting people, spreading propaganda, especially through magazines like Dabiq, Rumia, and Inspire, and to mobilize people to violence. The most recent ongoing case of the jihadi bride, Shamima Begum, is an example of the effect of propaganda on people. Azam.com is one of the world's first pro-Al Qaeda website, created around 24 years ago. Since then, the use of the internet by terrorist groups for jihadist propaganda has grown exponentially. In 2014, ISIS took over Twitter accounts, CENTCOM and Newsweek to spread fear and anxiety. Although the internet was widely used by terrorist groups, sophisticated attacks like that of the nation-state operated military attacks took place. But one can argue that these unsophisticated attacks did not take place mostly because of the systematic bombing campaigns carried out by the US along with allies on the ground to limit the space of ISIS to operate on. But their capabilities to carry out propaganda, majorly to target governments, financial entities, and the media, should be accounted for. By recruiting one good hacker could undermine an entire country. UK-born Yunus Sauli, known online as Irhabi 007, generated around $2.5 million worth of fraudulent transactions. He was then labeled as the world's most wanted cyber jihadist and was the first to be convicted for terrorism through the internet in the UK. These actions are to finance themselves, for which they resort to the tactics used by basic cyber criminals. People's sense of political relevance depends on the portrayal of these subjects by the media. According to Debrix, being conditioned to such a degree of generalized panic, any real cyber terrorist attack that does not follow the simulated scenario and produce the anticipated amount of casualties will fall short of being worthy of people's attention and worry. Should we face a major cyber terrorist attack, are we prepared for such a scenario? What we have to do is take those lessons from the 9/11 attack and apply to cyber threats. Cybersecurity should always be a team effort. The government and the private sector should work closely with each other to ensure that such a scenario won't take place. We should build expertise and work hard to harden our defenses. We can protect ourselves individually from these attacks by keeping ourselves aware of the threats of cyberspace and also cooperate with federal agencies and first responders. Other cyber threats that we face daily, like hacks and smaller cyber attacks, can also be avoided by being cautious. Always use a two-step verification in every online portal you use. Do not use the same password everywhere, as it is easier for hackers to hack into all your personal information. Always update the software in your computer. Be careful about how much information you post on social media, as hackers love social media. Be careful when sharing your personal information with anyone or on anything. Always remember that the internet is not a safe place. You can also check if your email has been compromised. Anyone who has been on the internet for a while will most likely have faced data breaches. In 2013, Troy Hunt launched a website, Am I Being Pawned?, that could detect if your email has been compromised in less than a minute. Ransomware and malware skyrocketed in 2020 with the contribution of the COVID-19 induced digital era. Cloud vulnerability, AI-enhanced cyber threats, AI fuzzing, social engineering attacks, deep fake, etc. are some of the most common cyber threats we are facing in the digital era. Thus, except for taking necessary precautions, it seems impossible to arrive at a solid conclusion to tackle cyber threats and cyber terrorism. Financial attacks, vulnerability exploitation, use of stolen credentials, and malware issues are the most commonly seen cyber attacks that we see today. But what seems most dangerous in the cyber threat spectrum is the use of the internet by nation states for offensive and destructive militant operations, like the Stuxnet, which has caused more havoc than the unsophisticated attacks by terrorist organizations who lack the sufficient tools, but one wrong move could seriously undermine an entire world run by the internet. It is in fact quite cheap for a country to develop a cyber weapon which could shut down the power grid that could result in catastrophic problems. The most cyber attacked country is the Republic of Korea, according to the 2016 Deloitte Asia Pacific Defense Outlook. But the country that fought cyber terrorism openly is the US, especially the Obama administration. Throughout Obama's leadership, cyber terrorism has proven itself as their greatest adversary. They imposed sanctions against Russia and North Korea, indicting government-linked hackers from Iran and China, launching reviews, raising defenses, put into effect policies against cyber terrorism. But the administration retired, followed by a series of blows from the following election. Russian President Vladimir Putin's involvement in the US election undermined Hillary Clinton's legitimacy and sowed doubts about Donald Trump's authenticity. Hence, it would be accurate to claim that the dynamic and unpredictable nature of cyber terrorism would not be eradicated anytime soon. Like I mentioned before, most of the attacks are stemmed in nation-state cyber-enabled kinetic attacks. The first viruses hit personal computers in the 1980s, and it has only increased ever since. But by taking necessary precautions and countries working together, we can make cyberspace a safe place to engage in. But whatever may be the case, always remember to take the necessary precautions to stay safe in the internet. In his closing remarks at the Summit of Countering Violent Extremism in February 2015, former US President Barack Obama said the following: "The high-quality videos, the online magazines, the use of social media, terrorist Twitter accounts, it's all designed to target today's young people online." Thank you for listening.